Hi, and welcome to the Selected Tech podcast, brought to you by a group of 4 MVPs doing webinars, sessions, and interviews on all things SharePoint, Office 365, and the Microsoft AI ecosystem. Their motto is learn, share, reuse. And here they are, Albert Jan, Rick, Stefan, and Tommy.
So there we go, our second official version that we are running as a live stream. So tonight we're going to talk about the Power Platform, a bit of a fusion development approach, so to say. And I want to walk you through how you can build a Power App that actually runs as a Chrome or an Edge extension. And the idea behind it was that I just recently started at a new company, and we're focusing on Power Platform and Fusion development, and I really wanted to play around with all the building blocks. So I haven't done too much Power Platform up until now, and I really wanted to experiment with what you can achieve and how hard it would be. I never built an actual Chrome or Edge extension, so that was new as well. So what I want to do tonight is just walk you through it. It's not going to be a long session because it's fairly straightforward. Basically, what you have is you have your Edge extension. It explains a little bit about what the extension does. Then you have a Power App that does something, and that's basically all that there is to it. So let me start by showing you the result. The idea behind it was I wanted to have a Power App, and I wanted that Power App to actually store specific things for me. And the idea behind it was, okay, I'm working on Edge, and there is this page that I'm reading, and maybe I want to save it for later. And I know that there are plugins for that, but the idea was, okay, I have the not invented here syndrome, just like everyone else, and I wanted to build it myself just to see how far I would get. Now, what I did is I created a Edge extension. The Edge extension loads a Power App. The Power App actually calls a flow, and that flow does the logic for me and saves whatever I wanted to save. Now, as soon as I turn on my Edge extension, you actually see here this little icon, which is my Power App. You could do whatever you like with it. So you could give it an icon, and we're going to walk you through all the different components. But as soon as I turn it on, it's here. And what I can do is I can go to a page. I can refresh this page. And what you will see as soon as I refresh it, or if I would click this button, it will actually load my Power App. The Power App is as an overlay added to my page, or it looks as an overlay. And as soon as I click here, what actually happens is it will execute something for me, and it will try to add this specific page to my reading list. Now, if I would go to another site, so if I go to selectedtech.show, it's a demo browser, so it's not there yet. But if I would go to this page, then it would show up, or it should show up. It's probably under my header. My iframe is not working properly, so we should try to fix that. But the button is just below the episodes part. It would show up there, and you can just add it to your list. Now, as soon as I click that button, what happens is it will add it to my to-do list. And here you can see that it added the to-do, it added a link to it, and that's all that's added. Now you could do things like a remind date or a due date if you work with tasks. But this is basically all there is. So there is this extension. That extension saves content to my reading list. And I can go to any other page. So I could, I don't know, let's pick a PMP community blog. Just randomly pick one. Let's pick the first one. So I'm reading this blog and like, oh, maybe this is interesting for me. Okay, I can add a homepage, or I can pick a blog about the provisioning tool that we recently got. You also see that there is this minor issue here that it now loads on multiple places. So perhaps I should do a little bit more logic in here, and that it's still below this header. So it's not flawless, but in general, it just adds the content to your page. Now, let's have a look at what's underneath. The first thing is that obviously there is this extension. And if you work with extensions, then, I can recommend, or at least what I did, is I took a walkthrough, and there is this extension tutorial part 1. Basically, this describes what you need to know. There is this, there are some details on the extension architecture, but basically, I'm going to first turn it off. But a extension is, in general, a package that you install with some content in there. And if you look at the way it works, each is running in its own thread. So anytime you open a new tab, your extension could be loaded. And within your extension, if you start looking at what it is, it basically, like it states here, it's a zip file that includes some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, image files, and it's all referenced in a manifest.json. So if you've done Teams development, it pretty much is like a Teams app package. If you've done, I don't know, any type of development where you have a manifest, it basically looks the same. All you need to know is you need to know what does the manifest looks like. Once you have that, you can just go through one of the tutorials, and what this does is it explains, okay, this is how the manifest looks. So you get some details, you get some explanation on how to load icons, how to do things like pop-up dialogues or any other things. And then basically, once you have your content ready, you're side loading that application. And if you're in Chrome, it looks slightly different, but generally speaking, the effect is the same. What you do is you go to your settings and you can go to your extensions. You can load an unpacked extension, and that is basically what you're loading, or you can load a packed extension. And that extension that points to, if you do this, load unpacked, it actually points you to a folder, and that folder is where your extension lives. Now, if I would open that in Visual Studio Code, you see that my manifest has some description, a name, a version, stuff like that. That's all pretty straightforward, I would say. And there are three important components. The first one is the content script. That's what actually gets loaded. And here you can say, I want to load this JavaScript file. I want to load it everywhere, but you could also say I only want to load it on HTTPS sites, or I only want to load it on specific sites. I can say I want to have it in all frames, or only in the first frame that actually gets generated, so it won't load in iframes on that page. And then you are loading a JavaScript file, but a JavaScript file might require access to different other files. So here are all the web accessible resources, and that are all the resources that your extension, your app actually has access to. So you will see in a second, the content script actually references a frame HTML and a frame JavaScript file. So I need to make sure that I have access to that. And then finally, because I'm running a Power App, I need to sign into my Power App, or I want to have single sign-on. And that means that my extension should have access to my cookies. If I don't have access to my cookies, I will get screwed because I can't access my cookies and I can't sign in without cookies. So if you are working with extensions, you do have to have some basic understanding of how your browser handles all those things, because it took me like, I don't know, 2 hours to figure out that I couldn't access my cookies. And if you can't access your cookies, you get this bunch of weird errors saying, oh, you can't sign in. I was like, I can sign in, press the sign in button, put in my username and password, and then you get like no error, but it wouldn't sign you in. And that's because it's in an iframe, and Microsoft doesn't like stuff in iframes if you're trying to sign in. So you do have to have some understanding of what's actually happening when you do stuff in the browser. Now, what this manifest actually states is, okay, we're gonna load that content script.js. And if you look at the content script, what we do is we pick up the extension origin, and that's to avoid recursive frame insertion. We don't want to load this iframe into itself. So we're gonna make sure that we only load it if it's a unique runtime ID. So any new tab will have a new runtime ID, but if you're in the same tab, any iframe on that page will have the same runtime ID. So that's check one that we want to do. Check two that we are going to do is we're going to make sure that it's not loading on login.microsoft.com, because if you try to insert an iframe on login.microsoft.com, Microsoft will state, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Go screw yourself. We're not rendering anything. You're not allowed to go through. So not happening. So the check needs to be done to make sure that we're not loading anything into login.microsoftonline.com. There are some other URLs that you probably want to exclude as well if you're working with this, but for demo purposes, this is going to be good enough. Now, then once we are allowed to render, or we are allowed to do stuff, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new iframe. That iframe is going to load the frame.html file, and we're going to pass on some parameters. We're going to make sure that we are passing on the current page that we are on and the current title of the page that we are on. Because if you want to do a read later, you need to have the URL that you want to read later, and that's the current, the location.href, and it makes sense to add the page title as well. Now, finally, we're going to apply some styling, and we're going to make sure that it's on top of everything and it's a fixed position and stuff like that. And then finally, we're going to append everything to our content. We're going to make sure that's in there. Then we have some HTML, and in the HTML, we're doing two things. We're adding a div with a iframe placeholder and some additional JavaScript as well. And this JavaScript, what this will do is this will actually get the URL parameters that we passed on. Then it will create a new iframe, and the source of the iframe is going to be my Power App that I built. So you get, if you create a Power App, you can automatically play it in your browser. You get that play URL with a GUID of your Power App that you want to use. And since we are building a Power App, you can add additional parameters. So we're passing on the title that we've gotten, and we're going to pass on the URL that we've gotten. And that's actually all the stuff that we need to fire up our Power App. If I would execute this, what I get is I actually do get my Power App playing. So this is all there is on the edge side of things, and this is all the logic that you need to create a new extension. Now, the second thing that we need our Power App, and our Power App again is a straightforward, nothing fancy in there. It's just one button, and we want to do something with our button. Now, if I would edit this application, you will see that it's just one screen with a data source, and that on that screen we render a button, and as soon as you click that button, we trigger a flow. Now, it's going to take a second to load everything. 1, 2, 3. So here you see it's my Power App Studio. We have one screen, one button. The button is called button 1. Add to my reading list. There's no weird stuff in there. The only thing that we do is we're gonna call our data source or our connection Power App to do. There's run, actually meaning that we're gonna execute it, and we're passing on two parameters, the title and the URL. And we're going to say, okay, I've got a list to-dos by folder. So I do have a data source with all my to-dos. And I'm going to refresh that data source because I added something new and I want to refresh it. We're not rendering it now, but if you would be rendering this, then you would need to refresh your data set in order to see changes coming in. Now, this is the Power App to-do run. And if I go to what I actually have here, you see here that I have the Power App to do. This is the connection that I have. This connection in here is it's an out-of-the-box connection that you have. It just triggers my flow, or it triggers Power Automate. Here I have the Power Automate, and I can edit those as well. And what you will see is that I use the Power Apps trigger. And the cool thing about the Power Apps trigger is that you can just say, oh, I'm adding it. There's nothing I need to do other than adding that trigger. And then I can say, okay, I have an action. And within that action, I'm actually using this title, body content, and those. So I picked my reading list. Those are actually making sure that I can actually use this set of values. So if I go back to my Power App, what you will see is, oops, I have to go to this one, button 1. You actually see that I'm doing the run parameter title and parameter URL. And if I go to my flow, you'll see here that I'm adding the title. I'm doing body content. So this is actually the parameters that I add to as being parameters of my Power App are also passed on to my flow. And then if I execute this flow or I request this flow, I actually get the data. Now, I could do other things as well. I could say, okay, the due date is always going to be, I don't know, to do or today plus 7 days, or a reminder date, or an importance, or a status. So I can do anything I like. Now I'm adding a to-do. I could also add it to planner, or I can send a adaptive card. There's no, limitations on what you can do. You could even add additional parameters or additional conditions. But generally speaking, this is a really, for me at least, fun way to play around with what you can achieve. Now, I understand, or I can imagine that maybe flow is not what we're looking for. We could do the same with a logic app. So there's no real requirement to do anything like this. The cool thing is that because you're running a Power App and it's just an iframe that you're loading, the whole functionality is serverless. There's no infrastructure that you need to worry about. And the only thing you need to do is making sure that you can package your extension and share that or reshare that. I'm pretty sure that it won't be allowed to put it in the Microsoft or in the App Store. It probably is a lot of requirements around that. But if you're running your own tenant, or if you're running Intune, because with Intune you can deploy this as well, then you can just play around with it and see what you can achieve. Questions?
Nice. Do you need a primary for this Power App? You don't need a premium license, right?
No. So if you
just
have Power Apps,
okay.
Basically, I'm gonna not save this one. Any new app, you can do a Canvas app. Let's call this demo. Oops, demo. Then you can pick either tablet or phone. I picked phone because that fits better in my screen, but you can do tablet as well. And as soon as you do this, you have your application. There's nothing in there, but as soon as you say, okay, I'm gonna click this button play, then you get the experience that a end user would see. Okay, I'm gonna go. Then what I can do is I can save. I'm gonna call this save. There we go. Loading. And then from that save experience, you can do share. And here you see, okay, this is actually your app ID. And you can put that into whatever you want to like. If you go here, you can see, okay, this is actually the Play ID that it's similar to the Play ID that I just showed you. The only difference is that there is this parameter or this flag called iframe is true. If you put in iframe is true, Power App knows that you're loading it in an iframe. It does work if you do not put it in there, but the doc states that is best practice to do so. So, I figured it made sense to do so.
And yeah, sorry.
Still, everyone who uses it needs a Power Apps license, right?
Yeah, but you could use the freemium Power App license that you get with Microsoft 365.
But that's also why it wouldn't make sense to put it on the, let's say, global edge store, right? Because
And now in my demo, the flow that I connect to actually uses my own to-do connection. So anyone who would press the button add to reading list will add it to my reading list. And if you want to reshare this in your company, you have to do something with either a managed identity or flow impersonation to make sure that it ends up in your reading list. But then again, you would also need some additional logic to make sure that everyone has a to-do license, everyone has a reading list in there to do, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's more to think it. Yeah, making it is simple, but you have to think about it before deploying it to an entire company or something. And the sign-in experience, because you show it in. Do you get the login in the iframe, or did it pop out of the browser?
So what you get is you get the experience. If I would do like a process guest, if I go to this, then this is the experience that you get, and you would get the exact same experience, but then in the iframe window. So it's smaller. The plus side is because you're allowed to use cookies, if you are signed in with an account, so my corporate accounts are always signed in, it is allowed to reuse those cookies. So it will, because it's Microsoft, it will just say, I'm going to do single sign-on for you. There you go. We're done.
Yeah, there's also an Edge extensions for that, or that you bind your profile to your Azure AD login. So if you flip that, if you flip your profile, it would take the already cached credential information, I guess, and provide it to that login dialog.
The only thing is that if your flow if you run this app for the first time, even though you have the flow connection configured, it will say, oh, you're using this connection. Do you want to allow this connection to do things with your to-do? But that's like a flow combined with Power Apps experience. And there is this tenant setting where you can disable this, but by default, that's something that's turned on your environment.
It's like giving consent, right?
Yeah, it's the consent stuff.
And if you open it for the first time in a separate window, do all that stuff, and then start using the extension.
Yeah.
Not that bad.
Yeah.
Can you from the extension can you grab data from the web page you are opening?
Yeah. So that's all configuration that you can do within your extension. Now, if I go to extensions, I would turn this on. You will see that if I go to, let's say I pick this this page, and if I hover over this your extension, it will actually show you the permissions that it has. And within this tab, it has permission to anything that happens in this tab. So the whole site, all contents, all thing that goes over the wire. So if you are sending cookies, credentials, it can access those cookies and credentials and potentially leak them, because that's
that's
how extensions work.
I'm looking for a positive use case, not from a negative one. Just think of like there are probably thousands of internal websites where users go to, and then they need to enter data from that site into another tool.
Yeah.
So you could create something like, okay, a special extension for that one specific use case, and you just open the page, the details of and the database entry or whatever it is, click your extension.
Yeah. So I'm not
scraping that and then push it through.
Are you making a Power App for recruiters?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's like legally allowed, but you could say, okay, I've got this plugin. I go to LinkedIn. I find someone. Let's say I'm going to find Appie, and I have this button, add to our recruitment system, and it would automatically scrape name, email address, phone number, stuff like that. That potentially is not allowed, but technically would very good
possible.
Could be possible.
Well, it's web scraping. There's nothing else. Yeah. So no one should really be able to detect that, or?
No, well, if you are doing it like for any
of course,
LinkedIn, they will figure it out. But
But if you are, if you're not creating a robot, but more like automate stuff that a human would fill out. So nothing like going to, I don't know, fill out tens of thousands of forms in 2 seconds. More like, okay, I don't need to search for anything. I just click there and it takes the stuff and provides it. It's adding value to the end user in that way.
Yeah. So it was a fun experiment. I think the next one is going to be, taking it one step further and see if we can actually do things like web scraping, or the other way around. Let's say I have this database with profile info about myself, and I'm entering a site where I need to provide my details. I know that there is this experience in Edge where you can pre-populate a form, but for some reason, I always have like 15 different email addresses, and as soon as I put it into a form, it picks the wrong email address, or it picks my company address instead of my private address. So what if I would have a extension with a Power App where I could press a button saying, okay, this is company related, or this is private related, or MVP stuff related, because I have a different profile for that as well. That could be an interesting approach as well.
Can you open up again the web page, because the extension is basically serving a local web page that is installed somewhere in your browser?
No, it's not running in your browser. So what happens is this manifest says load content script. So this content script then gets executed, and that's just coming from this, because I'm running it locally.
Yeah, but if you develop extensions for the browser, it's normally just a folder that you point to.
Yeah, so you have either a packed extension or
a load and unpacked is a normal folder in your file system, so you can.
This is currently my Git folder where I put those 5 files or 4 files.
Because what we could think of is that we create a browser extension the regular way, and then do something like in between layer. So you have Node, or Blazor actually also allows that to make the heavy lifting, and then it calls your Power Apps or your iframe and hands over the data, and then you have like a man in the middle in that regards.
Yeah, for now, because it was demo purposes for me,
of course,
I try to make the man in the middle as simple as possible, just one single JavaScript file. But yeah, it could be. So there is one thing that you need to take into account. If you would do Blazor or some API, you can just go around and call random APIs from your extension. They try to make that hard. So anything that's running locally is fairly easy, but calling another endpoint, then you need to do things with web accessible resources or whitelist or stuff like that.
But you can of course, but you can look at the what's it called? The SharePoint extension from Tommy from Helsinki. SB editor, because I did 2 or 3 PRs to that tool, and that can, because it takes your bureau token, you can access all the stuff there. So if you would create something like let's call it a shell around your Power App with a extension that is running on I think his is on Node and in TypeScript.
Yeah, so it's all TypeScript. It all makes sense. The only thing is that within the package, you have to define, okay, what's the content that we can access? And what you typically do is you bundle everything, and then within your app manifest, you bundle the stuff together and only white label the bundle content. But
that makes sense to because his extension, there's 2 UI parts. There's the one on top right hand corner when you click the button, and then what you do, like the flyout. But there's also the option to make it a part of the developer tools, like you see here, and that format would be perfectly fine for a tablet version or landscape version of a Power App, for example. And then you could get the data from the web page, pre-fill your forms, and off you go.
And as you can see here, it's exactly the same. You just sideload everything. You load the unpacked version, that's all there is to it. And the more complex you make your application, the more permissions it might need, or the more configuration it might need.
Of course.
Generally speaking, it's a manifest that points to a location where you can run any form of code you like.
Yeah, and it's a question of trust, of course, as well, because you hand over all your session information to that extension. Very cool.
And that was it. It was a short recording this night.
30 minutes close
to.
Not too bad. Other questions, remarks, things that you want to see?
Now I want to create a browser extension with Blazor. That's the only thing. That's the downside of such calls.
You have a bad influence, Appie.
I have the same feeling. Any recording we do, I see you guys presenting something was like, crap, I need to do that as well. And then I add it to my to-do list, and all of a sudden I have like 80 million tasks on my to-do list with things that in the fullness of time I want to figure out.
Let's be that your North Star.
Oh well. Cool. Then that's it for tonight, and see you guys in 2 weeks.
2 weeks probably. Yep.
Cool.
See ya.
Thanks, Appie.
Bye.
Thanks, man. Bye.
Bye.